I want to talk to you about the power of the human paradox known as certainty. This emotion, that the use of which can absolutely guarantee that you will utilize what you know to the fullest extent, and the lack of its use can virtually guarantee that you cannot achieve anything that you have the capability of creating in your life. The paradox, however, is too much of it in the wrong places at the wrong times can virtually seal your fate. This process can ensure your failure where success could have been certain. You see, all human progress comes from consistent and committed action, from decisive action. And yet, there's a factor that we owe that power to. It's the power to deal with obstacles, to break through fears. That's the emotion of certainty. And we all know what it's like to be uncertain, to be fearful, to be unsure. We know what that does to us. It causes us to question, to doubt, to worry, to hold back, to be immobilized. To be certain is that physical vitality, that energy that can push us through the barriers. So the question is, what is certainty? Well, if we look at a basic definition from the dictionary, you'll say it's something that's fixed. It's something that's settled. It's something that's proved to be true. It's dependable, reliable, indisputable. Something that is assured in the mind. Its Latin root is from the word certus, which means to sift, to discern, to decide. So how in the heck do we create certainty? How do we create this emotion? Where does it come from? We see it every day. We see it in our children. When all of a sudden they're willing to go for it. You see it in their eyes. You see it in their step. You also see when it's missing. You know it within an instant. It's in our physiology. And by the way, it's that same magic that gives Michael Jackson those incredible moves. That's what charisma is. It's that certainty that comes out of somebody. It's that energy when they walk by, when they look you in the eye, when the way they stride, the way they move, the way they smile, the way they shake hands. We all love it in people. We want it. We're drawn to it like magnets. That's what charisma is all about. And every one of us has charisma. All we got to do is turn it on. You can do it any time by choice. See, rarely can a human being accomplish anything of any true long-term value with hesitancy as the emotion, or with fear, or with uncertainty. So it's such a powerful resource for human beings, and yet so few people tap into it on a consistent basis. Leaders do. That's what gives them the power to lead. Achievers do. That's what creates the capacity to accomplish. Givers, that's what gives them the capacity to give. That sense of certainty that what they're doing, what they're giving makes a difference. That's what a healer does. Healers have that sense of certainty. That's what heals. We all have this power to tap into it. You've had moments in your life when you felt that sense of certainty, when you were on a roll, when it was flowing, when you knew nothing could go wrong in that moment. It was just there for you. And we've all had those moments too, where we couldn't find an ounce of certainty, where we were in a position where we felt like nothing in the world was certain. Our friendships, our future, our emotion, maybe our health. Have you been there? I know I have. Every one of us have been there at times. But what is incredible to know is that we can have certainty in a moment as long as we don't depend on the outside world as the source. As long as we understand and we know in our gut that this essential to life is available the moment we decide to employ it, that it's not something we need to reach for, that it's something we must let out. As long as we know not only that it is there, but we have the skill and the capacity to utilize it in a moment's notice, then there is no dream that you can dream that you cannot achieve. I've watched people transform, and in that same week, I've seen people who months ago were on a major roll and now have begun to deteriorate in their level of certainty, of faith, of power, of focus. You know, it's interesting. It's all a choice. One of the many great joys I had was to get a phone call from a friend of mine named Jeff Arch. What he always wanted to do was to write movies, but he just didn't feel, what would you guess? That's right, certain enough to really give expression to that dream, to really live it. He sure felt certain about his ability to move his body. You know why? Because he's done that a million times. And what he was doing was wonderful as a martial arts instructor, but it wasn't his real dream. And so many of us settle for something less than we can be just because we don't employ this emotional muscle called certainty when we really need it. Well, you know what? On that day, we had a great conversation, and we helped him to expand that emotional certainty. And he went back and started using that muscle, using it on a daily basis, and writing his tail off. He was not supposed to succeed. In fact, everybody gave him a great sense of, what would you guess? certainty that everybody's a writer. Everybody says they're going to write a hit movie in Hollywood, and nobody ever does. It's like 0.1%. It's absurd. It's never going to happen. Fortunately, his certainty was generated internally, not based upon what had happened before him, other people's failures, other people's ideas, or what the experts had to say. He stuck with it. His certainty in his mind created external reality. Sleepless in Seattle, phenomenal hit. The reaction was incredible. He said, Tony, it was so amazing. You know, we talked about this stuff, and I told you I keep visualizing. I kept picturing in my head how there's going to be lines around the block. He said, but I didn't think that would be that way for the screening. He said, I pulled up, and there it was, lines around the block. And he said, here are all these executives, and they're smiling, and people are clapping, and they're crying. He said, it was so phenomenal. And you know what's neat? He hasn't just got like a one hit. He's now one of the hottest writers in Hollywood, all based on his ability to generate certainty. He's got films in production now with Ron Howard as a director of one film. He's got Barry Levinson that he's working with in another one, and Penny Marshall in another one. He's got things in production with virtually every studio in Hollywood. How did he do this? How do you go from a guy who supposedly has no future to making it happen? You employ the power of certainty. You say, Tony, no, I'm a little interested. You've tested me. You give me a good story. You tell me all these great people. All right, got to the chase. How do I do this? Good question. Glad you asked. Certainty is a physiology. Now, most of us think we have to have something happen before we can create that certainty. We think that, all of a sudden everybody has to tell us we're great. Or all of a sudden we have to get A's on our report card. Or we have to get encouraged by the people around us to tell us that our vision is real. Every great leader has learned how to create that certainty inside first. In fact, I heard an interesting story recently about Disney. They said that when they opened up Epcot, there was a reporter that was talking to Roy Disney, and he said, Roy, God, it's too bad that Walt never got to see Epcot. And Roy just looked over at him and smiled. He said, he saw it first. That's why you're seeing it. That process of creating in your mind what you want to see in the world, and not just doing it where you say, well, that would be nice, where it becomes a magnificent obsession, where you feel there is not one sense of doubt within you that what you have thought, what you have decided, what you have resolved will become real. That has the power to give you answers. So let's not talk about this. Let's not discuss this. Let's have you use it right now. I'd like you right now to stand up, because I want you to experience this in your body, because I've talked about this issue before. I've even talked about an exercise I'm going to have you do, okay? And here's how I want you to do it. Stand up. Now, if you're in your car, this is somewhat more complex, okay? But if you're sitting somewhere, stand up and try this with me. What I want you to do is, if you can, again, if you're not in the car, I want you to close your eyes. Now, as you stand there, close your eyes if you can. And what I want you to do is I want you to imagine you want something you want to have happen in the future. And as you think about it, I'd like you to first kind of like hope that it'll work out. I hope it works out. I hope I can make it happen. I hope things work out. I hope so. I hope I don't screw up. I hope. Just kind of hope. And just stand the way you do when you're hoping. Adjust your body. And just really put yourself in a state of hoping. Oh, gosh, I hope so. I don't know. Yeah, I hope so. I hope it works out. Breathe the way you do when you're hoping. Put the kind of look on your face like you do when you're hoping. And by the way, if you're sitting in a car, you can still do this with your eyes open and imagine what you're like when you're hoping. Just don't hope that you're going to miss the car in front of you, whatever you do. Feel certain about that. But seriously, put yourself in that state of hoping. And notice what you picture when you hope it'll work out. How do you breathe? How do you feel? What's your body like? Now put yourself in a state of uncertainty. Now become uncertain, where you're almost worried. Put yourself in a state of uncertainty. You're really unsure. You don't know. Maybe a little tinge of worry there. Stand the way you do when you're a little bit worried, a little uncertain. And notice what you do differently. Go for it. Come on, actually do it. And if you say, well, I don't know what to do, Tony, just do it. Just trust yourself. Just change your body anyway. Trust your instinct. The first thing you would do. If you're really worried, how would you stand? Where would your arms be? How would you breathe? What's your posture like when you're really worried? Is there tension in your body when you're really worried? When you're uncertain? When you're unsure? Do you wobble back and forth? What do you do when you're not sure? What do you picture when you're not sure? What do you say to yourself when you're not sure? How does this feel to be unsure and maybe a little bit worried? Just notice how it feels. And now, Go into hope again. Huh? Go a little bit more certain. I hope so. Just feel that and see if there's any change in your body. Come on, try it. I know it sounds third grade. It sounds a little weird. Sounds bizarre. You don't know what to do, but do it anyway. Trust yourself. Now, go from that state into a state of absolute certainty, absolute intensity, where you know there is no question in your mind that you can achieve what you're thinking about. That thing you want to have happen in the future, make yourself feel certain right now, where you expect it to happen. There is no question in your mind whatsoever. Stand that way right now. Assume the physiology you'd have if you were completely certain you were going to achieve what you're focusing on. If there was no question in your mind, if you expected it, if you absolutely knew its achievement was certain. Breathe the way you do when you're absolutely certain. Put the kind of look on your face like you do when you're absolutely certain. Is there a gesture? Is there something you do with your hands when you know you're absolutely certain? What do you do? What's that connection? What's that feeling? Create it in your body, create it in your face, and add some excitement to that certainty. Will you expect it, you know it, and you're a little excited about it? Notice how you're standing now when you feel this way. Notice how you're breathing. When you know this is going to happen, when you feel that certainty, what do you picture in your mind? What are you picturing now that's different than before? Feel that certainty in your body. Feel it in your voice. What do you say to yourself when you know it's going to happen, and how do you say it? Trust yourself. The first thing that comes out, just notice it. Now, do you feel any difference between feeling certain and feeling uncertain? Go back to uncertain for a second. You go, no, I don't want to do it. Go, just do it. Just do it for a second. And notice how it feels like. Notice what happened to your shoulders. What happened to your breathing? What happened to your balance? What are you focusing on when you're all of a sudden uncertain or a little worried? Yeah, notice the difference. And then get certain again immediately. Instantaneously get certain. Certainty is a physiology. It's a choice. Create it in your body right now. You know it's going to happen. Create that feeling in your body where you are absolutely certain you expect it, feel it again, and lock that feeling in. That is, anchor it in, if you know what I mean by that. If you don't, act as if you know what I mean. Just lock that feeling into your body. Know what it feels like. Remember it. Connect with it. Now, you can sit back down. Now, I got a couple questions for you. What did you notice was different in your body when you were certain versus uncertain? Well, I'll give you some examples of what people tell me. See if these come along with your list. First of all, what was your body like in a different way? Most people say when they're uncertain, when they're a little worried, or even when they're hoping, their shoulders tend to drop. They tend to lean to one side or the other. Or sometimes they wave back and forth a little bit. They don't feel solid. They don't feel connected to the earth. Oftentimes they say what they're picturing is they see it working out and they also see it not working out. And then by having both those images, of course, they can't feel certain. Oftentimes people say, well, when I felt like I was hoping, I felt passive. But when I felt certain, I felt like doing something. Did you experience that? Could you feel the difference in your body? I mean, really, did you really feel it? If you don't, get up and do it again until you can feel the difference. But most importantly, I want you to get something else. You created that certainty. How fast? Boom, in a heartbeat. And you did it by choosing to have it. Now you might say, well, Tony, that's really great. So now I feel certain. I'm very positive. So what does that got to do with it? That's not going to make me successful. You're right. Certainty by itself will not create success. Certainty must be attached to skill. But you know what? There are a lot of people that have all the skill on earth, but they're missing the emotional certainty, so they do not employ it, and they will never achieve what they want. I can also tell you that if you get enough emotional certainty as you seek an answer, you will find it, even if you've never had it before. I don't know of a more important human emotion to cultivate daily than this sense of certainty. And I want you to know this emotion is practical. You know, most of us are afraid to employ our certainty. You know why? I don't want to get all certain about something, get myself all worked up, have all this hope, all this belief, all this certainty, and then what if it doesn't work? What if I put all this uncertainty and I invest myself emotionally and I have all this, my identity tied up in this thing and it doesn't work out and then I crash and burn emotionally? That fear keeps you from having the certainty you need. That's what uncertainty creates, fear. You've got to choose one or the other. You can't serve both masters. Once you've done all your homework, once you've investigated, once you know you're on the right track, you must invest all your emotion. And yes, sometimes you're going to be certain and you're going to be wrong. That is a risk. But which risk is greater? To give your all in the wrong way and discover and learn from it so you can apply yourself better in the future, or never to employ the most powerful force that moves the human spirit? Now, I've spent a lot of time about this concept of certainty. You might say, okay, I got it. I hope you got it. I hope you've gone beyond just understanding intellectually. Maybe you ought to listen to this thing about 10 times to get it in your body, right? That's when you really have it. It's not when you understand it. It's not when you say, I hear you. It's when you say, I feel you. I feel it. I know it. I'm using it. I'm doing it right now. That's when you really got it. Now that I've spent all this time telling you how important it is to be certain and how powerful it is and how that makes your life successful, now let me tell you something else. Being too certain can destroy everything you want most on earth. Plus, it can make you bored. What am I talking about? Well, as much as we want things to be certain, if we get too certain, we're not happy. That's where boredom comes from. We all want a certain amount of suspense. We want some drama. We certainly want surprise. If you knew what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen, like for every baseball game, every football game, every movie, guess what? You probably wouldn't be very excited about going seeing them. We want surprises in our life. That's part of the dichotomy. It's part of the paradox. We want both of these emotions. We want to be certain everything's going to work out great, basically. And we also want to be sure that we're going to have some fun. And a lot of fun comes from not being sure what's going to occur. So we want to be able to cultivate that emotion. But even more importantly, being too certain about anything can cost you your business. It can cost you your relationship. It can cost you your health. It can shape society in a negative way as well. We all need some variety. And that's the challenge. We want certainty, but we want variety. And of course, it can be accomplished by being creative in our lives and understanding our needs for both of these emotions and using them where they're appropriate. That's the challenge that we have in life, that what's worked so far may not work to get you to the next level. It's worked to get you here, but it may not work to get you where you really are committed to being now. Well, that same understanding is necessary. In order to get that new understanding, you got to be able to let go of what you're so sure about. You got to be willing to not be so certain. You got to be uncertain about things so that there's room for some new ideas to come in. In order to take full advantage of the power of certainty, you got to first be uncertain so you can get new information to get certain about. Does that make any sense? In other words, if you just stay certain with where you are today, you can't grow. You've got to make friends with uncertainty so that you're open, so you can take in new concepts, new ideas, new feelings, new thoughts, new beliefs, new strategies that you wouldn't even listen to if you're so certain. By the way, that's why most people tend to grow most when they're in pain. Because when things are going really well, they feel real certain about how it's going. They don't listen to anybody else. But when they got a challenge, suddenly you find people that are highly motivated to grow, to expand, to learn. Well, you don't have to wait until you have pain. Just learn to utilize uncertainty to break your pattern for a moment and do it directly. Do it intelligently. Schedule a time you say, for the next hour, I'm going to get rid of my certainty about these things and I'm going to entertain totally new possibilities. Do it consciously and you have some real power. So it's critical for us to have that balance in life, to know how to make uncertainty our friend, to know how to be able to induce that state so that we can create a pattern interrupt, so that we can truly learn and grow and expand at a brand new level. Let me offer you, I jotted down here, 4 key things you've got to be sensitive to, that your need for certainty can sometimes, how should we say, create roadblocks, or maybe even debilitate you, maybe even destroy all the good you created with the certainty in the first place. The first major challenge that your need for certainty can sometimes create is it can cause you to generalize in a way that is debilitating. What do I mean by generalize? Well, we have to generalize. Your ability to stand up, get out of your chair, and walk across the room comes from your sense of certainty that that floor beneath you is going to support you. If you weren't certain about that, you would be disempowered. You would not be able to make that action happen. You'd just be sitting in their chair with some fear, immobilized. But the reality is you've learned to generalize, that usually floors hold you up. Maybe this one, you don't ask, will this specific spot on the floor hold me up? If you did, you get caught up in the paralysis of analysis, right? You can overanalyze. You can get uncertain about everything and not be able to do a thing. The problem is sometimes we generalize out of our need for certainty, out of our desire to not think. What do I mean by that? Well, you and I live in a world that is so information dense. There's so much information coming at us at such an unbelievable tempo and pace that it's overwhelming. So what most of us have learned to do is become what we call cognitive misers. We've learned not to think very much about a lot of things, to just push those things out of our mind, to just accept that whatever people say to us about it, or what experts say, or how it just is. We've also learned to save ourselves time to just generalize. So sometimes if something gives us pain, we don't think it through with a great deal of intelligence. We don't evaluate it in detail. It takes too much energy. Somebody harasses us a lot. That's because they're this nationality, or they're this color, or they're a man, or they're a woman, or they're that kind of boss. Instead of looking at the human being and seeing who is this soul in front of me. Sometimes that happens, and it cuts the quality of our lives. We have to enter each moment, each relationship, each situation in a brand new frame so that we can not be so certain, so we can explore, so we can discover. Because otherwise what happens is once we define people in a certain way, we look for ways to support it. We find legs to back it up. Sure enough, seek and you shall find. You think this person is insensitive, you look for places where they're insensitive. Well, if we look for places in you where you're insensitive, we might find things to back that up at times too. We got to be very careful. Generalizing will usually cause you to limit the quality of your life. Be careful of it. Here's the second thing that the need for certainty sometimes creates in a debilitating sense, and that is it immobilizes you. There's so many people that want to change something in their life, but they still don't do it. They know what they should change. They know how they should change it. They know why they should change it, but they still don't do it. They're immobilized. Why? Fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what? Uncertainty. That's why you want to make uncertainty your friend. So what are you talking about? If it's the thing that keeps me from taking action, that's right. Your fear of it is what keeps you from taking action. If you learn to enjoy uncertainty where it was a state where you said, hey, I can be uncertain right now. It's okay. I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to know for sure. I'm open to discovery. Then you're empowered because the answers that you really want for your life to move the next level are in the realm of the unknown. I guess it just comes down to realizing that uncertainty does not equal pain. Uncertainty can be a source of tremendous pleasure. What's the third challenge that the need for certainty usually creates for people? Well, it creates this process called rationalization. Yes, indeed. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody did something and you knew that they knew that you knew that it was wrong? Are you confused yet? And yet they still managed to feel good about it? Just understand this. The strongest force in the human personality is the need to remain consistent with how we define ourselves. Most of us define ourselves as rational human beings who are intelligent, who don't consistently do absolutely stupid, ridiculous things that would destroy their body, their mind, their emotions, or their relationships. So when we do something that we know is not so good, in order to be able to feel good about ourselves, maintain our self-esteem, we've learned to rationalize. In fact, there is a term in psychology for this. They call it cognitive dissonance. What is cognitive dissonance? It's simply this. Anytime a person finds himself holding simultaneously two conflicting beliefs or opinions or views of themselves, it starts to pull us apart. We need a sense of certainty about who we are and how we live. We can't have these totally conflicting beliefs. For example, if you're in a situation where you believe you're an incredibly intelligent person who's committed to health and yet you smoke cigarettes, that creates what we call cognitive dissonance. Your brain starts to fry. Now, in order to keep your self-esteem and keep yourself feeling like you're a rational human being, we rationalize. In other words, it's much easier to change our perception of reality than it is to change our actions. Finally, what's the fourth thing that a sense of certainty can cost us? That can be a problem for us? Where can it debilitate us? Well, when you think about this, most people in life, when they're trying to decide what to do, especially if they're uncertain, what do? Most people look to see what other people are doing to decide. In fact, there's a term in social psychology for this. We call it social proof. That is, when people are not sure what to do, they look around to see what other people are doing, and they come from the false belief that says, if enough other people are doing something, then it must be right. If enough other people believe it, it must be right. Or at least if enough authorities believe something, it must be right. If I see it in the news enough, it must be right. Is that true? You and I both know the answer to that, right? How many wonder drugs? How many wonder solutions? How many wonderful ways to live that we've been taught we're supposed to make our lives happier have not worked? How many have been promoted to us? I'm talking about by the quote-unquote experts. Listen, the ultimate expert in your life is you by testing what works, not just by looking around and being like everybody else. If you do what everybody else does, you'll have what everybody else has. You know what that's like for the general population? It's not a pretty sight. We've got to think uniquely. We've got to think differently. We can't just accept what's there. You have to become a critical thinker, an active, progressive thinker, not someone who just accepts what's given to them. And I'll give you what the challenge is. We're cognitive misers. I chose those words very specifically. We have all this energy that we have to spend on cognition to think things through. It takes energy. It takes time. Most of us don't have enough time in our lives as it is. So we tend not to think things through. We tend to look for shortcuts. Shortcuts and beliefs. Shortcuts. Tell me. Just get to the bottom line. Tell me what it is. Tell me what it's about. Come on, I gotta go. And that process sometimes shortcuts our lives. because we don't think and we don't find out what's really going on. See, most of our lives are being shaped by outside influences. You know why? Because there are two ways to be influenced in life, either through the peripheral route or through the central route. What's the difference? Well, when we're trying to make a decision about what to do, what to believe, what to feel certain about, when we're using a shortcut, we use the peripheral route. We say, cut to the bottom line, give me the answer. And what matters to us most is not the full explanation, but who's telling it to us. Is it an authority figure? Is it a person of significance? If they say it, whether it makes sense or not, we accept it. It makes sense to us immediately because we don't want to take time or energy to examine it and think it through. After all, they're the expert. Why should I know? I don't want to know the details. I don't have time. The central route is where you ask penetrating questions, where you don't just accept what's given to you. By the way, most of the people in our society are influenced daily by the peripheral route. Their life is being shaped by someone else who's decided how they want them to think. What about your doctor? What have you been taught your whole life? Your doctor, first of all, has dedicated their entire life to help you, and we all know that. We know they care about us deeply. So obviously, when there's something wrong with you, that's the person to go get the answer from. They have the answer. Well, have they ever been wrong, even though they've been sincere and caring? Absolutely. Because guess what? Their sense of certainty comes rarely from their education anymore, but is more and more often coming from the education they're getting from the drug salesman. So many new drugs come out every year, there's no way for a doctor to keep up. And the primary educational force very often can be the drug companies themselves. And why is this happening? Because 70% of all drugs on the market today weren't even around 15 years ago. Someone has got to educate them, and the pace that it's coming at them is amazing. In fact, in the LA Times article I was reading recently, it says, quote, "The education of the American physician about drugs has been relegated to drug companies by default," end quote. Charged Dr. Jerry Avorn, an associate professor at Harvard Medical School, who has studied the influence of pharmaceutical marketing. Quote, "As a result, pharmacological solutions are thought of first rather than non-pharmacological approaches that could be just as effective and safer." He says, quote, "For many doctors, drug industry marketing is their prime source of information about drugs according to numerous studies," end quote. And then he goes on to describe a study done at Harvard Medical School where they tested a series of doctors who they exposed to a series of medical journals to find out what influenced them most. And what they found beyond a shadow of a doubt is they were shaped more by the advertising for the drugs than by the scientific literature. He said, but when the doctors were confronted, quote, "Yet they were unaware or unwilling to admit that they had been influenced by non-scientific sources." You see, if a person is working around the clock to try and help everyone, they've got to make decisions quickly. They care deeply. They're doing everything they can to help us. Yet these decisions are a matter of life and death. So we've got to make sure that we're part of the decision-making process. We've got to be aware of the impact and where the information's coming from, that our doctor's struggling to help make decisions to help save our lives. So if the primary source of education for our doctor can be a drug company, do you think there's any challenge or any possibility of cognitive dissonance on the side of a drug company? Have there been any drugs they've been put out that later on we found out should not have been put out? That maybe the drug companies themselves knew about that? Have any drug companies been fined for this? You know, the answer to all the above is yes. The point of the matter is the consequences, they'll get much greater in this context. A classic example that maybe you've heard about recently is the drug DES. It's been banned for pregnant women now for more than 20 years. But you know what? There are countless women all over the U.S. who are incredibly angry because doctors are now telling them that they're suffering from their genital cancer or miscarriages or other reproductive difficulties simply because their pregnant mothers took DES, a synthetic hormone that meant, ironically, to prevent miscarriages at that time. And you know what? Doctors gave it en masse. Right? But the ban came 30 years after these well-meaning doctors began prescribing DES to literally over 3 million pregnant U.S. women. There are 300 companies that sold DES that are being sued all over the nation. Women that are going through radiation treatment and having their insides fried. Their fallopian tubes are shriveled up. And they found out they can't have children. I know this is graphic, but I want to get across to you something. If you allow someone else's certainty to influence your decision without you thinking through and analyzing the downside of anything, it can cost you that you value most on earth, your capacity to live healthfully. What I'm trying to say to you is there are consequences to having certainty because someone has told you what to believe in an area. Every single day, most people are making decisions about what to feel certain about, and what you feel certain about shows up in your body. I mean, look at this thing called AIDS. It's devastating the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. It's instilling fear in millions of people. In the beginning, many people thought, well, it's not going to affect me because it's a gay disease. But now we know a lot better. We're also beginning to find out that this disease is not a single disease. It's made up of people with cancers, people with something called wasting away syndrome, where someone literally, their body begins to break down completely. No human being who cares about anybody could possibly not feel for these people who are suffering throughout society, much less those that are living the hell of fear. What's really fascinating, though, is to see that with all this pain, with all of these problems, with all this tremendous fear, that many people are dealing with it very differently. In fact, every day we're hearing about people that have taken this disease and turned it around. People who are breaking the mold and for more than a decade now are living totally healthfully, who supposedly were going to die. What these, quote, survivors have in common is that they're dealing with this information very differently than those who are succumbing to the disease. They're taking in the information from authorities and they are questioning it. They are not allowing the fact that they have AIDS to be a death sentence. There are a tremendous number of questions that are being brought up in this area as a result of this. And it's a complicated issue. AIDS isn't just a disease. It's a syndrome. Not a single disease, but a series of different elements that are affecting people's health. And you know what? It's full of mystery and misinformation. And people have got to stand guard and look at what information they're being given. Because most people, when they're told they have this, quote, disease, their whole life disappears overnight. They become depressed. And if you've studied any of the work of people like Norman Cousins, Dr. Bernie Siegel, the whole science of psychoneuroimmunology shows that when someone becomes emotionally depressed, so does their immune system. Let me give you a good example. Recently, we've seen one of the greatest basketball players, I think, of all time, and that's Magic Johnson, give up his career. And he gave it up for a variety of reasons. Initially, he gave it up not because he was ill. He wasn't wasting away. He didn't have some major disease of any sort. He went in to have a blood test because he was having an expanded insurance policy. He wanted to have larger coverage. And as a requirement today, he had to take a blood test, which included an AIDS blood test. Suddenly, when it came back that he was, quote, HIV positive, his entire life was turned upside down. Now remember, he had no symptoms. He was absolutely fine. There was nothing going on in his body of a disease nature. And to this day, he still plays well. But suddenly, overnight, everything in his life changed forever. What's really interesting is what made him stop playing was not the fact that he had HIV, because he felt good. It's because his doctor told him in a very caring way, certainly thinking about Magic's best welfare in his mind, he told him that he thought it wouldn't be a very good idea for him to continue to play basketball. It may accelerate the disease. It may break down his immune system. But the problem is this basketball game is this man's lifeblood. It is his life. But with this kind of information from authority, with such certainty, he quit. And you know what? After almost a year, it drove him crazy. So he finally came back and he played basketball. He played in the Olympics and he did extremely well. He played in the All-Star game and he did well. He then finally came back to play basketball for the Lakers. But you know what? Other people's ignorance, their lack of true understanding of this disease, their fear caused him to feel like he was a marked man and that he'd have to give up what he loves most. Because otherwise, people wouldn't be focusing on his basketball. They'd focus on him as a carrier of a disease that could kill them. This kind of thinking is what tears people's lives apart. We can't let this happen to ourselves, to those we care about, to those we even know about. All of this happens because we don't have enough information, because we generalize too much. Hey, let me give you another example. Here's somebody else who got the exact same information that Magic got, but he responded radically differently. Let me quote it for you from another article, a different article in the Los Angeles Times. I just read it recently. I'll tell you what, it stunned me. Here's a man who was told that he was HIV positive, just like Magic, but let's discover how he took this same information with a different point of view, and it has shaped his destiny completely differently. Quote, in the 5 years since Rick Munoz learned that he had the AIDS virus, he has watched his time grow short. As short as 2 hours and 52 minutes to be exact. What are they talking about? Well, this guy is a marathon runner. He's going to run the Boston Marathon today. It says he'll not think about the virus inside of him that is so far little more than an abstraction in an otherwise healthy life. It says Munoz, 34, is running marathons sporadically before finding out that he was infected with HIV. Since then, hard running has become his obsession and possibly his best friend in his fight against the onset of AIDS. It says he doesn't talk about death and dying. He talks about the next race. Last year, Munoz set a goal of racing in 1 marathon a month. And then he completed a punishing 14 races all over the country. Most were under the 3-hour mark. This year, Munoz's itinerary has a different twist. 8 marathons ending with his 50th in Hawaii. Munoz has smiled patiently through the warnings that his hobby, perhaps, is not the best course for someone with HIV. He knows that people concluded from Magic Johnson's retirement that athletics and AIDS virus don't mix. But Munoz says he has watched too many infected friends succumb to what he calls, quote, death sentence mentality, also known as certainty in a negative context. You always have to have something to look forward to, Munoz said. If you rid yourself of that habit, you're asking for it. Munoz's physician, Steve Knight, credits his patient's rugged training with helping him to stay healthy. Knight said that the running, besides offering him physical benefits, is an important emotional weapon in treating the human immunodeficiency virus. Munoz says that he's never felt better, especially since shedding 30 pounds over the past 2 years with a vegetarian diet. His times have dropped with his weight, and he said he plans to keep running for as long as possible. Interesting. Here's a classic example of how someone got very certain in a very different way from the same information. Just to give you a perspective, people are so afraid of this thing called AIDS, but there are many researchers right now that are questioning whether or not it is a single disease or whether or not, in fact, this is multiple diseases that we're now covering with one title. We just recently changed the definition again. It used to be that you had to have HIV. Then it became you had to have the antibodies to HIV because lots of people with AIDS don't have HIV in their body. They can't detect it. That makes it kind of tough. So now they look for antibodies. Antibodies usually show that you're healthy. If you have a disease, you got antibodies, it shows your body's immune system is working. Every infectious disease up until now. But what's interesting is suddenly we have a new way of defining it. And the newest definition came out last week. And the newest definition is if you have any one of a series of other diseases that used to be known under other titles, they're all called AIDS now. Various cancers, cervical cancers, and one of the descriptions is because now what happens is if it's qualified as AIDS, there's funding for it. So, for example, for a woman with cervical cancer, one of the things that's now being pushed is to make sure that that's considered to be another AIDS symptom. I'll give you a classic example. The number one AIDS symptom, the symptom that basically was the basis of creating the whole concept of AIDS, was Kaposi sarcoma. One of the original doctors to work in this area is from New York University's Medical Center. His name is Dr. Alvin Friedman Kine. He was one of the first physicians to associate Kaposi sarcoma with AIDS, and he now states that since the initial determination of this cancer as the definitive symptom of AIDS, there's a growing number of men with Kaposi sarcoma who have no HIV infection. The CDC now concurs with him. And what Dr. Friedman Kine also states now is that at least a small portion of people who've been diagnosed with AIDS because they have the cancer may not have AIDS at all. Now, we're seeing this starting to happen with researchers all over the country. You read their research from people like Dr. Duesberg. This is a gentleman from Berkeley who is a member of the American Academy of Sciences. He's one of the first researchers to identify retroviruses, of which HIV is the basis. Duesberg was a pioneer in cancer gene research, and he was one of the first to map the genetic structure of retroviruses. So this is his whole expertise. He now flatly says HIV is not the cause of AIDS and could not be. I'll give you some quotes. Quote, "The AIDS virus will turn out to be the most colossal mistake in medical history." This is the guy from UC Berkeley, not some guy selling some potion or some little lotion in the back door someplace over in Venice. This is a top guy, American Academy of Sciences. He said, too, HIV infects and kills only an insignificant number of cells, about 1 in 10,000, and the body replenishes cells much faster than this. The metaphor he uses, it would be like trying to conquer a country by wiping out 3 soldiers a day out of a nation the size of China. It would take forever. It'll never work that way. So if this is really true, and I'm blown away to read all these different researchers that are now telling us this is true and showing it scientifically, how in the heck can we still have this massive fear campaign going on? Well, one reason is because people are truly dying. This is real. There are human beings out there that are suffering. But what they're saying is we got to look more closely and see what is the real cause, because if we try and treat a false cause, these people are going to die because of our lack of understanding what's really going on. We got to have enough compassion, enough courage to see what's happening. Now, I don't want to go off on a tangent on AIDS. It's not an AIDS tape, but I'm bringing it forth because it's a very potent metaphor. 167,000 people have died of this disease in the last 11 or 12 years. I mean, these are real people that are dying, that are suffering. Every one of us has got to care. It's something that affects every single one of us. And because we care, we've got to ask those important questions. Those important questions like, is the terror tactic the best approach? Does the fact that somebody has HIV, does that mean they're really going to die? Because if you tell somebody that, you bet there's a good chance they're going to start believing it and their body just may comply. So we've got to be so careful about what we believe or what we promote to other people to believe, because it shapes our destinies physically and our society as a whole. We've got to have so much caring, so much compassion that we don't just blow it off and say, oh, it's never going to affect me, nor do we just go off in total fear and say, oh my God, this disease may get me and destroy our lives. We've got to think critically. We've got to ask the questions most people don't ask. One researcher is doing that is a man named Dr. Joseph Sonnabend. He's a pioneering AIDS researcher, and he's the founder of the AIDS Medical Foundation, which then became the American Foundation for AIDS Research. And you know what? He stepped out and blown the whistle on those that are using this tactic of creating total fear in the population as a whole. He says he believes a lot of it is based around fundraising instead of really caring about the patients and meeting their real needs. He talks about this whole concept, and when you begin to read it, you begin to see this dynamic of cognitive dissonance, that we've taken one approach to this disease, and we haven't found a solution, and we just keep doing the same things more and more, instead of just saying, hey, is this really all there is? Or even, are we looking at the right cause? Is this really the source of the problem? Sonnabend says, quote, so what have these hundreds of millions of dollars of research given us? Nothing. AIDS education, question mark? All I see is terror and confusion, and AZT, which is a disaster, unquote. So he's against the terror. He said there's a very real set of diseases out there. What many of them are asking is, hey, maybe AIDS isn't a single disease, but a series of diseases we've all thrown together under one single title, and maybe that's why we're not finding an answer. We're oversimplifying the situation. Many things can wipe out someone's immune system. The use of drugs, stress, things in the environment, and we're just assuming it's always one cause. And when the cause doesn't fit, when somebody has HIV and they don't get the disease, well, they will eventually. They will within 3 years, they said originally, then 5, then 7, now 10. There are many people still alive and well, thank God, who didn't necessarily accept that this was the only possible answer. We have to think with more precision. We have to be willing to ask the question, what's really going on here? Around the world, researchers are now saying we've been following the wrong theory. We're spending $5 billion in the U.S. on the wrong theory, putting all this manpower, all these resources that could be coming up with solutions for suffering people in the wrong direction simply because we've committed to it. The old cognitive dissonance. All this money and time and energy has been spent, so we better stick on it. The man who first isolated the virus is really a man named Dr. Luc Montagnier. Montagnier is with the Pasteur Institute in Paris. You know what he says about AIDS? Listen to this. He now says AIDS, HIV by itself, AIDS by itself is not fatal. This is the #1 expert in the world. Listen to what he says. Quote, AIDS does not inevitably lead to death, especially if you suppress the cofactors that support the disease. It's very important to tell this to people who are infected. Psychological factors are critical in supporting immune function. If you suppress the psychological support by telling someone he's condemned to die, your words alone will have condemned him. It simply isn't true that the virus is 100% fatal. So this is not an AIDS conversation, but I just want to give you an idea. There are a lot of things that we accept. In fact, some people get upset when they even hear this, saying, how can you even talk this way? I'm not talking this way. I'm telling you that there are alternative views from extremely qualified people. And if we just accept what we're told on the surface and we don't question, it could make the difference between life and death for someone. But you might ask, well, wait a second, how could this happen? How could we be in a position where so many researchers believe the same thing? Well, maybe a little cognitive dissonance could play a role. When you ask Duesberg, how come other people don't ask these questions? He says, quote, it's very difficult to say you were wrong when you're spending $3 billion a year and 180,000 people have been given AZT. They're trapped in so many ways, unquote. And if you're wondering how this dynamic could even affect the scientific community, The people are committed to supporting society, humanity as a whole. How it can happen? Listen to what Dr. Sonneborn says. In retrospect, that HIV was the cause of AIDS was certainly far from conclusively proven. But at the time, given the pressure, the intensity of public fear, the newness of it all, and the glory of the new discovery, the American scientific community settled for less. The announcement was made and an industry was born. End quote. I just want to shake up the legs of certainty you have that what you read and hear is absolutely accurate. Let me give you one final example. It's an anecdotal example, but one I have a personal experience of. About a year ago, I had a gentleman come to my seminar, and he told me that 2 weeks before he'd come to our Date with Destiny seminar, there was a gentleman who came in for a prostate surgery, which is not a complex surgery, and the man should have been fine. There was nothing really wrong with his health outside of that. And what happened was, he was mistakenly wheeled into a wrong room. The doctor came in and read the charts, assuming that he came in because he had cancer and a heart problem. He actually had the wrong charts. So he gave them their version of what we call death counseling or death and dying counseling and never talked specifically about the disease. The man went to bed that night and died of a heart attack. See, this is the power of what's been called in many tribal cultures, pointing the bone. See, what gave witchcraft its power? It was the person's certainty that it would work on them. When that person came along and pointed that bone, people would literally die. Their own certainty that their body would stop created the result. So what can we really learn from all this? Well, I want you to understand with all the enthusiasm that I have for certainty and its power, it is a paradox. It must be used in a balanced way. You've got to be very careful about what you get certain about if what you're certain about has very strong consequences for your life or anybody you care about. And don't ever forget about the human side of these issues. The people that are suffering. Because it could be you someday if we don't think smart, if we don't take care of ourselves. Let's be sure to think critically and care deeply. Understand that things may be more complex than the simplified answers that most of us are looking for in this environment of constant information downpour. So in any area of your life, I don't care if that's in the area of what you believe spiritually or politically, or if it's the education of your children, or if it's your physical health, or it's the way you manage your money, those issues that have major consequence do not accept just an expert's opinion or even the majority of people, because the majority can be wrong. Don't accept my opinion. Make sure you think it through yourself. Get second and third opinions and then ultimately decide what you believe is right, because this is your life. And how it turns out is based on your decisions. Please, for your benefit, make them consciously. I want you to make sure you stay open. And I'll tell you what, the reason it's so difficult to be open is when we believe something and created a sense of certainty about something, that's in our physiology. But let me tell you the good news. You can begin right now to change this whole process. So let's return to the positive side of certainty. I've been beating you up on the negative side. Let's finally get back on the upswing. The bottom line is if you're going to err on the side of certainty of what you're capable of. Err on the side of certainty of what's possible. Err on the side of certainty that gives you the ability to take action and try something new. Something that causes you to use your personal power to reach out and attempt. Because by doing that, the only way we know what we're really capable of is by pushing ourselves out there. The only way you know how far you can go is to go a little too far, maybe. To push yourself out there and discover. Now you got to be smart, you got to be balanced, but certainty can give you the power to reach things you hadn't reached before. You've got to break outside the patterns of your past, because otherwise your future will be the same as your past. And unless we change the quality of our thinking, we won't change the quality of our lives. I'll tell you now my final example of certainty and its true power. About a year and a half ago, I was conducting a program in Hawaii, one of my certification programs. And part of the process of that seminar is a pamper pole experience, very much like you see in corporate America, where people climb to the top of these poles as part of a team building experience. And of course, they're harnessed and they jump out to reach a trapeze. And it's a very challenging event. And of course, everyone is screened before to make sure that they're physically vital. They don't have any heart problems or any physical challenges that wouldn't allow them to be able to participate. The person's supposed to bring doctor's slips, and they're supposed to let us know if there's any challenge and make sure their doctor has cleared them. And we investigate that fairly clearly. We ask everybody, and we keep little forms on everyone. Well, this particular unique day, a gentleman decided that he was going to push himself. He didn't tell us he'd had a heart challenge. He climbed to the top of this pole and made it to the top of the pole fine, jumped out to catch the trapeze, and then at some point while he was still hanging up there, had a heart attack. And when they brought him down, he was completely out. Fortunately, like any program we do, we always have professionals on hand, and immediately the professionals came and began to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to check out what was going on. And I was up in the seminar room, and I heard what happened, and I immediately sprinted down to the facility, and I came down, and there was this man lying on his back, turning another color, and everyone there was saying he was dying or was dead. And the gentleman who was working to save his life, the paramedic, who was on site, not a paramedic from the hospital or in an ambulance, was pounding on his chest, giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and the shock device that you see, that I'm sure you've seen used on someone who's had a heart attack, is called a defibrillator. And the doctor on site was not listening to his pager, and he had locked his office, and so it wasn't available. So we called immediately in an ambulance. Unfortunately, on this particular island of Hawaii, we were waiting 20 minutes, and still there wasn't an ambulance there. And several doctors were on site, emergency technicians who were in the programs, as well as those we'd hired to be on site. And by the time the ambulance came and they began to shock this man, he was, on the little recording, he was flatlining. And everybody around him was totally silent, and they said he was dead, that he was gone. And you can imagine the intensity of emotion. And so some people started to talk to him a little bit, and somebody else said, "Shut up, don't do that, be quiet." And I found myself in a place of questioning. That's how you create doubt. That's how you keep yourself from being certain. Ask yourself lousy questions. I started asking myself some lousy questions like, oh my God, what's going to happen? How could this be? I mean, why would God do this? All questions that will not make anything better. And then I started asking, what could we do? What could we do? Something's got to be done. And I saw people starting to talk to him, and I went back and forth, and people were looking to me to know what would happen. I didn't know what to do. All I knew is this was beyond imagination. And so I finally turned and I thought, I'm not certain what's true, but one thing that I would hope is true, and I would say, is to do nothing will make no benefit. We've got to try and stimulate this man. We've got to stimulate his nervous system, and talking to him has got to be one way. I know from people that were in comas who've come back out and said that when people said they were gone, they could still hear something. And so I used that as a reference, and I said, let's talk to him. Let's talk to him about why he needs to stay here. Let's talk to him about what's most important. Who here knows him? And we started talking to him personally, and I started talking. We all started asking him questions. We started saying things. This man on the ground who supposedly was dead. And you could see some of the doctors just shaking their head like we were wasting our time. And we got more and more intense, and people started saying things that he had laughed about earlier, and things that he'd been challenged by, and stimulating, and talking about his family, and all these different things to stimulate him. And yet as we did this, he continued to just flatline for another 10 or 15 minutes. And finally, they put him on a stretcher, and they put him in the back of the ambulance, and I started to get in the ambulance, and the doctor pulled me aside, and he said, Tony, he shook his head, and he said, look, the man is dead. He said, don't waste your time. He's gone. He's been dead for more than 30 minutes. He's gone. And he said, the only reason they're doing this is because you keep telling these guys to keep working on him, but shocking him, it's worthless. He is dead. He's gone. And I said, I just don't accept that. I don't accept that. I said, we've got to do everything we can do. I said, you know what? Maybe he's gone. Maybe you're right. But if I'm going to err, I'm going to err on the side of giving him every possibility. I am certain. I got to stay certain that he can make it. And I just slammed the door in front of the guy, and I got in the ambulance. And meanwhile, by the way, I kept talking to this guy, and I had one other doctor with me that believed that talking to him could make a difference. And so we kept shocking him and going after him, and we took the next 30-minute drive to get to the hospital. That's how far it was on the big island of Hawaii. Going through winding roads with the thing screaming. And meanwhile, the ambulance driver is going crazy. He thinks I'm stupid for talking to this person. He's mad. He's blaming me. He's blaming our group. He's blaming everything, saying, this guy's dead because of us. And you can imagine the kind of feelings I had while he's saying this to me. And I had to just shut him out and remain certain, keep talking, and keep stimulating this man, do everything I could, kept these people going. And about halfway to the hospital, we turned a curve real intensely, and the defibrillator spun and smacked the side of the wall of the ambulance, and it stopped working. Now here is this man who's been gone for 30 minutes or 40, 45 minutes at this point, and we don't even have a way to stimulate him electronically. I thought to myself, you know what? He either doesn't want to be here, or his creator, our creator wants him. I don't know what. And I started to cry inside, and I said, you know what? I just can't give up. I got to stay here until everything's been done. I said, come on, don't give up. And I stayed in a sense of certainty. Something can be done. Something must be done. They said it's broken. They tried to call and try and figure out how to stimulate him with chemicals, with drugs, and they couldn't get through because it was going through this winding area in the mountains, so they couldn't get through to the base who could tell them what to do and how to revive him or push him with drugs. And we kept doing this thing, and one of the doctors finally got mad and smacked the side of the defibrillator, and it came on. And they started working on him some more. And he's still flatlining, but I thought, my God, this is working. Keep going, keep going. And a long story short, after about 5-10 minutes before we got to the hospital, it looked shortly after that, like right after we started using the defibrillator again, after it got smacked, he had a little bit of response where it wasn't a complete flatline. And I said, look, he's alive. And I went crazy, man. I got excited. And the doctor said, no, don't get excited. He said, it could just be spasms in the body. It doesn't mean that he's there. And there's no real other signs. And I said, stay with him. I kept talking. I said, come on, you can do it. And I kept asking him questions and stimulating in every way I could. And at times I started questioning myself, and I realized questioning myself wasn't going to help him. If this was worthless, at least I gave my all. I had to stay with him. I had to believe he could make it. I had to have absolute certainty, absolute faith. I had to trust, and I get these other guys to do the same. And the bottom line is, within a short period of time, that little bit of response on the graph was even greater. And I said, look at his skin. And this one other doctor who agreed with me, who was going through my seminar at the time, he said, look, his skin's different. He's coming around. There's something there. There's some life there. Because he'd gotten dark, like gray, and like nothing was there. And there was a little bit of color. And we got him to the hospital. We brought him in. And they said, let's see. He's got a tiny bit of a pulse. And an hour and a half later, I was sitting there in the room, and he opened his eyes and looked at me. And he said, how did you get on my vacation? He didn't quite say that clearly. It was garbled. I had to hear it through his oxygen mask and try and decipher it, but that's what he was saying. And by the way, his name was Howard. And they still said he's not out of the woods yet. And I said, if he's made it this long, if this guy was technically dead for 45 minutes or more and he's back, he's back. And I tried to talk to him and be with him, and I stayed there, and then I came back to the seminar. I'd left the seminar, and I left a couple of people to run it. We had about 1,000, 1,200 people there, and they're all as worried as you can imagine. They all thought for sure he was dead, and I got up and I told people, I said he made it. And you know what's fascinating? The doctor who told me he was dead thought I was lying. He thought I didn't have enough guts to tell people the truth. So he called the hospital, and then he couldn't believe it, so he drove there to see this guy personally. And the next morning, he got up and shared with people, and we got it on videotape, talking about how he's been through 3,000 of these in emergency care, and that there is no way, this man was dead, there's no way, this was a miracle. He said the miracle was all of you people out there and the absolute faith and certainty he created. He said, I have no other explanation for it. And the guy started crying, and he said, all it makes me think about is all the people I gave up on because I didn't stay certain maybe long enough. And I said, listen, rather than crying about that, who knows what was right? But it's obvious, I think everything happens for a reason. And I said, I bet you're going to operate a little differently in the future based on this. He shook his head. He said he just couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. But it made him reevaluate everything he was doing in his practice. And the reason I bring this story up, besides the fact that it's one of the most potent examples of my life, of faith, and I don't have the hallucination that I made this guy live, because I know that I don't have that kind of power. But I do believe that our joint focus and certainty made sure they kept treating him all that time, because as the doctor said, they would have quit after 15 minutes of flatlining, and there was going to be no reason to continue. Our certainty made him continue to be treated, and he made the decision, or whatever you believe spiritually, to be here. But I just received a note from him. His name is Howard, and it said, Dear Tony, I couldn't let another Thanksgiving go by without thanking you for saving my life. That is the power of certainty. I didn't know what to do. I decided to err on the side of certainty that would make me act and give my all. He could have just as easily passed away. That wasn't something I could control. But I could control making sure that we did everything we could physically do to support him. Can you imagine how that makes me feel? I'm here to tell you that what we accept as the limits of the human mind, body, spirit, effort, of what children are capable of what you and I can truly do and be, is usually a lot less than what we're capable of. Make certainty your ally. Make it your friend. And learn to also make uncertainty your friend where it's appropriate. Learn to balance the human paradox, and I can promise you a life that goes far beyond what you've dreamed. So here's your assignment. Number 1, decide right now, today, before you go to sleep tonight, that for the rest of your life, you're going to be a progressive, active thinker What do I mean by that? You're going to be a person who's always searching for a greater understanding, for more ideas, maybe for an alternative view, not just for the sake of an alternative view, but just so you can understand it, so you can choose from a greater level of reference. Decide for the rest of your life, you're not going to analyze things, you're not going to analyze them to death, but in those key areas that affect the quality of your life most, where there are huge consequences to what you buy into, that you're not just going to accept what you're told because someone's an expert. That you're going to become an expert as well. That you're going to take all information in and decide what you believe is right. And those areas are your mind, your body, your relationships, the things that we call our identity, what we believe about ourselves, your money, your economics, your potential, beliefs you have, the sense of certainty you have about what to believe politically, spiritually. These are issues that have consequence. There are only about a half dozen or so that really impact our life most. Decide what they are and decide to really constantly expand your knowledge in those areas. Become an expert. 2, besides being an expert in this area, if you are dealt a challenge in your life, I don't care whether it's a health challenge, a challenge with your children, with their capacity to learn, I don't care if it's something financial, make sure that once you get a viewpoint or two, you ask yourself, is there an informed opposing view to this? Someone has a completely different view, and go pursue those. Make sure you know all of your options, or as many as possible, before you make your decision. Now, obviously, you have to put a limit on the amount of time you put into any decision making. Otherwise, you get into the paralysis of analysis. 3, cultivate the sense of uncertainty in certain areas. When you start being totally certain, you think it might be limiting you. If you got a negative belief, the way to get uncertain is ask yourself lots of questions, something you were sure of. It's good to make uncertain your friend, to get curious, to begin to wonder about those things you used to just accept. 4, decide that if you're ever in fear and you're trying to make a decision, that you will not make a decision out of fear. It almost always will be the wrong decision, unless you have zero choice, like it's an instantaneous thing. Decisions out of fear usually cause us to go with someone else telling us what to do. You've got to get yourself in a sense of certainty and say, okay, if I was certain, what would I do? If I was in charge, put yourself in that state, make a decision out of a sense of certainty instead of out of fear. You're much more likely to make a right decision. 5, develop a set of beliefs that'll give you certainty even during the tough times. People have often asked me, how have you made it through some of the challenging times? And I said, I think it's just certain beliefs, sense of certainty I have. Beliefs like I'm guided. Not an ego thing, just thinking that, I'm here to do some important work, and I feel like the right answers will come to me. That sense of certainty, that belief tends to create the answers. It causes me to find things because I won't give up until I find it. Or a belief that with the problem comes a solution, that our Creator doesn't give us a problem without first giving us the capacity to deal with it. I don't know whether it's true or not, but by having certainty that that's true, it's helped me to find solutions because, again, I know it's there. Or the belief that with every adversity, there comes the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit. That core belief from a book called Think and Grow Rich I read years ago, I've remembered it. And I'll tell you what, I've applied it. I've always looked for a benefit. I wasn't just going to solve the problem. Somehow this is going to make things better. And because I felt certain about it, it has. Faith with work can produce virtually anything we're committed to. And that one has guided me in everything from the situation I just shared with you with a gentleman with his heart attack to virtually anything else I've done. Come up with your own core beliefs. Write down, this is what I believe, and allow it to create more certainty. And lastly, number 6, practice the skill of creating certainty and doing it instantaneously, like we did in the very beginning of this tape, because certainty is a skill. And the more you do it in your body, the more you'll be able to create it and tap into your real power. Practice creating certainty 3 times a day consciously. Create an anchor for it, where you can change your body like that for the next 7 days. If you'll do this, I can promise you, you'll have a muscle that can help you to succeed at a larger scale than you ever dreamed possible.